So, morning everyone. So, today we're going to talk a little bit about the Achilles tendon. I think most of you know the Achilles tendon is the conjoint muscle, conjoint tendon that comes from the gastrocnemius and the soleus down to the calcaneus. So it's this big tendon that sits here at the bottom of the calf, and it's the combined tendon of these two muscles. Now, if we think about these two muscles, these are one of the workforces when we're running, and these take combined 8 to 10 times your body weight. So actually, if we think about that, when we rehab it, we've actually got to do quite a bit of work to get that calf strong enough to cope with the running. Now, if we talk about the Achilles a little bit, predominantly find it more so in males. I'm not quite sure why that is. It's more prominent in masters males, people over 40, and that's because basically the tissue is less compliant. As we get older, our tissue quality isn't quite as good. It takes longer to adapt, and I think basically we think we can probably train like we used to, and actually what we've got to do is we've got to allow our body to adapt a little bit longer. If we split injuries down, we've got younger people tend to get more jointy, bony pains. Older people tend to get more sort of tendon injuries, and it is just because our tendons aren't as elastic, they're not as compliant, and it takes longer for them to adapt. So if we change our training, we've got to do it more gradually, and we've got to actually give ourselves a little bit of time to adapt. So if we increase our training over a couple of weeks, it's good then to have an easier week just to allow our body to adapt. And typically, if we look at our training load, our sort of injuries tend to occur 3 to 6 weeks after we've made our training error. So if we've upped our mileage, our intensity, our frequency of running, have a look at your graph on Garmin and see what happens after, at sort of 6 weeks or 3 to 6 weeks. It's like, oh gosh, I've done that, and then suddenly I've started to have a niggle. And actually use your data, because it can actually tell you quite a lot of stuff. I think the other thing to sort of just mention on training errors, something that sort of I sort of do believe quite strongly, is a lot of us run at a mid-pace too much. So we've got this training zone and we've got this moderate pace that we all probably tend to do most of our runs at. Now, this moderate pace is actually too fast for us to recover from our hard sessions with, and it's actually too slow to give us any adaptive training. So actually, if you can split your training to 80-20, so 80% of your training is at a sort of slow enough pace that you can chat and you can have a conversation, and then you can put 2 sessions in there that are strong, that are fast enough for you to get your adaptive change. That's actually sort of a good week. I think we probably spend too much of our time in that overtraining, overloading zone. So just something to think about. So obviously we lose our tissue tolerance as we get older. And I think another thing to say is, if you've got pain and you rest, that's fine because the pain goes away. However, all those adaptive changes that you've made from your training then go away as well. So that then when you start training again, you've lost that compliance, you've lost that sort of ability to tolerate the load, so you have to start really slowly. And one of the most common times for re-injury is when you sort of go back into training after an injury, after you've rested. So it's actually quite important not to rest completely if you can. So if you can walk, you can go on the cross trainer, you could do a little bit of very light running. You could find, okay, if I do my normal training, I get problems. However, if I drop it down and I do my rehab, actually I can cope with that, and then I can shift the curve back again. So it's actually quite important to sort of remember that if you stop training completely and you've done no running, no loading, when you start again, you actually need to go through that adaptive change process again, so you can't go back to where you were. If you do, that's when you get re-injured. Okay, so you need that training stimulus, and it's called that envelope of function. And you can have 2 lots of training stimulus. You can have the too high training stimulus, which is probably what a lot of us are guilty of. You do too much, suddenly we've got overload, but you can also do too little, and we haven't got the adaptive changes that you need. Okay, so what do we do if we've got a sore Achilles? Okay, quite often it'll warm up when you're running, it eases off, it's stiff in the morning, it's quite inflammatory, it's painful to touch. So the first thing you do need to do is back off a little bit, and back off to a level where you can run safely and you haven't got pain when you're running, and actually you've got no reaction the next morning. Now obviously if it's really acutely painful and you've got a lot of pain in the morning, it's too painful to run, you've got to back off completely. Go onto the cross trainer, and if you can, do a little bit of walking. Few things that actually we can help you with. So if you've got a sort of a sore Achilles, start off by putting a heel raise in your shoe. Just get a little Sorbothane heel raise, pop that into your shoe, and that just takes a little bit of the stress off the Achilles tendon a little bit. You could try a rocker shoe. Some of the Hoka rocker shoes actually might help Achilles just settle down just a little bit. I've not ever tried one of those, so I'm just sort of going on a sort of few ideas here. You could try an orthosis, so you can get some quite decent shop bought orthoses, and again, if you put it in, walking around, if it takes a little bit of pain away, you can use that temporarily, just to help just get that Achilles to settle down, and then quite often you can take it out and you don't need it further down the line. This is a time where I would avoid the treadmill because that can put a slightly increased load onto your Achilles. Avoid uphill, avoid speed work, and then avoid running on soft surfaces. So if you can eliminate all those and actually just do some very easy running. The one other thing I want to sort of talk about is your biomechanics. It's not a biomechanics talk, and I'm not going to sort of go into that. However, if there's one thing that you could change, if you could if you could increase your cadence by 5%, that's enough just to change that load on the Achilles and actually just take the stress off it a little bit. And I know one of the sort of warm-ups that we do is it's called mincing, so it's actually very, very small steps. And if you can do that as part of your warm-up, that might sort of help you prevent getting sort of Achilles problems. So we've got our Achilles. We talked lots and lots of other videos about causes of injuries. Don't forget that there might be tightness higher up, tightness down the chain, weakness in the chain. Explore all those other avenues, but this is more specifically about Achilles today. But don't forget there is obviously that's part of the taking control and finding the cause, as well as external causes of training error. So what do we do? So the first thing we've got to do is we've got to load it. We've got to get peak load through that tendon. Then we've got to introduce plyometrics, and at the same time we've got to increase our cumulative load. So our peak load is just about loading that tendon. Now studies have shown that the maximum load of the Achilles tendon is when our foot is in maximum dorsiflexion. So if we stand up, okay, so maximum dorsiflexion is in that part of the range, okay, and that's when peak force goes through the Achilles. So we've got to eventually get our training through that part of the tendon when it's in peak dorsiflexion. However, if we've got an acute Achilles, we don't want to start in acute, a really sore point. We just want to start in mid-range, and we start off with 2 feet, and that, we've gone through these before, and we go up for 3. And we come down for 3, and we start off really, really slowly, up for 3, and we go down for 3. Now, if that's actually too painful and you're really acute and you can't manage it, then you could go onto a step, onto a chair, okay? So then you can think, right, I can go up for 3 and I can go down for 3. And think, okay, well that's okay, that's the first point of loading. And then you can go onto 1 foot and you can go up for 3. And you can go down for 3, 2, 3, down 2, 3, okay? And when you're doing that, you want to keep the weight over your big toe, and you want to keep a nice pyramid through that foot. You don't want your feet turned out, and you don't want your feet sort of turned in, so you don't want to be going up into that position. You want to keep a nice pyramid. And then you can start adding a weight. We haven't got any machines at home, so you can start putting a weight on your knee. Makes it a little bit harder. We can't do leg press. We haven't got a leg press machine either. So once you've done your 2 feet, then you can go onto 1 foot, okay? So again, slowly up and slowly down. And you can play around with that. You can make it a little bit harder. You can pause, 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 down, down, Okay, so and then to get to the next phase and to get our maximum dorsiflexion, we then go on to a step, because when we're on a step, our feet go more into that position. My step's not very good in here, so I'm not going to show you that one, but you know, toes on the step, drop down the heels and then lift up. Okay, so there's loads, I've got loads of videos of that, but that's your progression. Basically, what you then do is you then add weights. You put weights in your hand, or you put a rucksack on with weights on your back and you load it further. Now you can start off with 3 sets of 15, 3 to 4 sets of 15 if you can, if it's nice and easy, and then over the sort of, you know, 6 to sort of 12 weeks, because it does take quite a long time to rehab this, and it's really, really important to keep going with your rehab. Don't stop. Just because your running's a bit better, don't stop. Okay, so once we've done ours without a weight, as the weight gets heavier, we then decrease the number of reps, and we decrease the number of reps to 3 times 6 when it's quite, you know, when it's actually really heavy and you're really sort of struggling to get that up and down. So that's the sort of latter end of our rehab. Okay, then we bring in our plyometrics, and plyometrics in this case, you know, it's our hopping. Now we've gone through hopping before, and we can start off with jumping on 2 feet. So if you remember, I've got my square here. Here we go. That's it. So I don't think, can I get that so we can see the square? No, not really. Okay, so you can just start off with some stationary jumps. So we're just starting like that. You think, okay, just start off with 10 and just do 3 sets of that, and then reassess it the next day. Okay, not worse the next day, that's brilliant. And then you can move on to some single leg hops. And again, reassess it the next day, and then you can start going on to forward jumping. So obviously you start jumping, I'm not very good at hopping, with movement. And that sort of brings in your sort of plyometric phase of it. Obviously your cumulative phase, we want to have you doing some running. If you can't run, let's start off with you walking. If you can walk up to about 10,000 steps a day without a reaction, that's actually really good, because as soon as you start doing even the sort of smallest rehab session, you suddenly do 5,000 or 6,000 steps a day, and that's a big jump from nothing to that. So if you can be walking, it's less of a jump to get there. Okay, so we've got our progressive resistance, we've got our plyometrics, and we've got a cumulative load. If we can, decrease your cadence. We've talked a little bit about that. Now, I don't know how you do this, but I'm sure there's going to be some techie people out there. You can set your Garmin so it bleeps if you go outside your range of your cadence. So you can look at what your cadence is. You could set it for sort of 5 or 10% quicker and try and stay within that range. And it's about taking quicker steps. So if you can just take quicker, shorter steps, that will really, really help with loading of not just your Achilles, but of your hips and your knees. So anybody that's got gluteal tendinopathy, knee pain, just that tiny change of your cadence. And sometimes you don't have to do it permanently. It can just be done just enough to get you over this injury. So I think that's for me, that's the main thing about the rehab of the Achilles. I think one thing to remember is don't stop it. If you're prone to Achilles problems, you've got to remember that our tendons are getting less compliant. The more strength work you can do, the more loading you can do, will just give you that little bit more resilience while you're running. So keep it going, keep your calf raises going, keep some hops and jumps going as part of your warm-up. Spend the first sort of few hundred yards mincing and just doing little steps. So you're just making sure that Achilles is a little bit more compliant. It's just got a little bit more time to warm up. And just if you've increased things, give it a week then to adapt. Okay, and I think, you know, just look after it. Strength work is actually key. If we go back to our rehab, it's quite nice to do, if we're starting our running, do our run on 3 days and do the strength work on the same 3 days. So the next day we then get a rest day to allow our body to adapt and recover. So that's how I would approach an Achilles. So sorry, a bit of a long one, but quite a lot of information to get in there. We've got a bit of a chat today with the physios from the region about Achilles. So if there's any more gems come from that, I'll pop them on tomorrow. Okay,